as either the god Hermes or a sparrow. More currently, he's a professor and writer at UTC and has published over 20 books and poetry anthologies, and is the winner of several awards, including the Prairie Schooners Reader Award, the Crazy Horse Prize for being an absolute stallion, and was awarded as the Order of Freedom Medal by the President of Slovenia for his literary and humanitarian work in the Balkans. Some of his greatest accomplishments include marrying Terry Harvey, owning several hundred baseball hats, and tolerating honors freshmen since the dawn of time. Richard Jackson, everyone.
Yeah, well, the tolerating honors freshman is the biggest accomplishment. So I had spent a good deal in the 90s and off and on in former Yugoslavia during the wars there, and helping to get refugees out and trying to raise money for the people there during a pretty horrible war. So there were a lot of incidents, and there's a couple of committees that I was on that when I passed our desk photographs and incidents and stories, and so it was hard to somehow come to grips with them and figure out how you can order them and talk about them. And one way I found to do it was I was reading the Roman poet Horace at that time, and he wrote a lot of odes, and an ode is different than a lament. A lament is just saying things are horrible and all over and all that. An ode says, yeah, things are horrible all over, but you got to try to find some way out. And so this was sort of, the structure of this was sort of based on one of his odes. I never know what to title things. So this was called Objects in This Mirror Are Closer Than They Appear. It has something to do with objects. Because the dawn empties its pockets of our nightmares. Because the wings of birds are dusty with fear. Because another war has eaten its way into the granary of stars. What can console us? Is there so little left to love? Is belief just the poacher's searchlight that always binds us? And memory just the tracer rounds of desire? Last night, under the broken rudder of the moon, soldiers cut a girl's finger off of the ring, then shot her and the boy who tried to hide under a cloak of woods beyond the Sarajevo town. Listen to me. We have become words without meanings, rituals learned from dried riverbeds and the cellars of firebombed houses. Excuses fluttered their wings. Another mortar round is arriving from the hills. How long would you say it takes despair to file down a heart? When this morning you woke beside me, you were mumbling how yesterday our words seemed to brush over the marsh grass, the way those herons planed over a morning of ground birds, panicked in their nests. When my father left me his GI compass telling me it was to keep me from losing myself, I never thought where it led him or would lead me. Today, beside you, I remembered simply the way you eat a persimmon and thought it would be impossible for each drop of rain not to want to touch you. Maybe the names of these simple objects, returning this morning like falcons, will console us. Maybe we can love not just within the darkness, but because of it. Ours is the dream of the snail hoping to leave its track on the moon. We are sending signals to worlds more distant than what the radio astronomers can listen for, and yet what? Maybe your seeds of daylight will take root. Maybe it is for you the sea lifts its shoulders to the moon. For you the smoke of some battle takes the shape of a tree. on your balconies of desire, in your alleyways of touch. Each object is a door opening like the luminous face of a pocket watch. Maybe because of you, the stars too desire one another across their infinite, impossible distances forever. So that it is not unthinkable that some bird skims the narrow sky where the century fires have dampened, where the soldier stacking guns in death's courtyard might look up and remember touching some story he carries in his pockets. A morning like this blazing through the keyholes of history, seeing not his enemy, but those lovers, reaching for each other, reaching towards any of us, their words splintering on the sky, and the gloves of their hearts looking for anyone's hands. I listen to all kinds of music, but I think one of the favorite things I listen to is jazz. For me, one of the most moving jazz pieces is a piece by John Coltrane called Alabama. And it's a beautiful, moving piece, and at the same time, it's based on a kind of horrific scene that happened in Alabama. And he wrote the music to, there was a speech by MLK about what had happened, and he wrote the piece to Alabama to exactly parallel MLK's words, both in the mood and the content. So it's called Listening to Coltrane's Alabama as the Perseids Fade Out. Nothing can explain how to love a world that sets the heart's clocks always out of sync, where the meanings of our words are ambushed by the kind of hate that becomes the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, September 15th, 1963. Nothing to explain the way Coltrane's horn starts to speak over a trembling bass, tracing over the words of King's eulogy, borrowing phrases and cadences until the pressure mounts into a collision of dirges as the music itself were trying to speak. Nothing to explain how, when I first read the story years ago in the Eagle Tribune, I still believed how dreams meant something that we could find out later. Even now, the day begins to leach into the night the way a few hopeful notes seem to hover like doves over the band, or the way Anaximandra described the world as a silent rock floating in space. Now it seems Coltrane's whole quartet has entered the church, everyone going everywhere to arrive at the same note. I can see a thin line of grief shimmer on the ridgeline. 4 girls, Addie, Denise, Carol, Cynthia, one of them beheaded beneath the rubble. The wind tried for hours to rearrange their dust. One story followed another like geese until there was no story, no trial, no conviction. When Coltrane came in over McCoy Tyner's piano in its slow lament, he already knew the future was exactly the past. The silences and pauses tell a story our words cannot. Coltrane didn't play music, he played the heart. Here, even the insects seem to have stopped out of respect. There's a wind that's not even a wind in the trees. Anaximandra knew our world was a box whose sides were endless. Coltrane knew our world was a church whose sides collapsed. Alabama. All he needed was that one word, rolling down the register and trying to lift itself at the end with a desperate sigh. I'm writing this just north of the state of Alabama, The meteors in the darkened sky telling the same stories Annex Amanda heard. Or maybe the dreams of 4 girls still wandering off ahead of them forever. Now Coltrane too seems to cry at the end, and if you listen close, you'll swear you hear his voice whispering against the stories that set the killers free. Stories that staggered around the courthouse halls until too late. The music stops, and you have to play it again just to breathe. The first shadows on the lake start to blot out the stars. There's nothing to tell the owl who continues to accuse us all. Nothing to tell even the fish who continue to nibble at the surface of the water, as if to test, then reject the only world they can see. There must be a reason I started this, though. There's nothing to explain how the soul's music laments its own music, a music now lost in the pure music of grief. I also love movies. One of my favorite movies is Pulp Fiction. Why? Okay. What's wrong with Pulp Fiction?
I wasn't expecting that.
I love it because it's so discontinuous and also brings everything together. So there's this great scene at the beginning where Samuel L. Jackson is talking about how the French put mayonnaise on their French fries. But the French fries aren't really French. It goes on crazily forever. John Travolta's going back with them, and at some point somebody says, you can't get the facts until you get the fiction. So I thought, that's a great phrase. I'll use that as a title. So this goes. The fact is that the death I put on in the morning is the same love I take off at each night. The fact is that my life slips out the back door just as I arrive. Just now, just as I tell you this, while I'm looking for a little dignity under the open wound of the sky, I'm putting down the story of the 2 lovers killed on a bridge outside Mostar. And the fact is, love is extinct as those animals painted on cave walls in Spain. The fact is, there is not a place on earth that needs us. All our immortal themes are sitting on the porch with woolen blankets over their knees. But who wants to believe this? Instead, I'm looking for the right words as if they were hidden under my doormat like keys. I would like to be able to report that the 9-year-old Rwandan girl did not hide under her mother, dead for hours. There are so many things too horrible to say. And I would like to tell you the eyes of the soldiers are sad, that despite all this madness, I can still kiss your soul. And yes, you might say I was angry if it were not for the plain fact, the indisputable fact, that I'm filled with so much love, so much irrational, foolish love, that I would not take the pills or step off the bridge because of the single fact of what you were about to say, some small act of kindness from our wars, some simple gesture that fools me into thinking we can still fall in times like this in love. It's fun to read from this, but I haven't read from this book in a little while. So I was in college, having a new car and figuring out the insurance and all that, and they started this thing way back then called no-fault insurance, which was really great. It could mean you could crash into someone and it wasn't your fault. They'd forgive you for, I think, 3 times. And I thought, well, if that's true, how about like no-fault love? That would work, wouldn't it? So that was the title of this. although I'm not sure what it has to do with the poem. I guess it's sort of semi-autobiographical. No one seeing the suspect, Richard Jackson, should ever try to approach him. His description contains as many contradictions as Proteus. The Hart's cab driver reports that he has fled into tomorrow because he is so tired of speaking about yesterday. If you do not recognize his crime, you are already an accomplice. The remarkable thing about tomorrow is that everything is the opposite of today. The shadow that now stalks you becomes your confessor. And it is true, desire never loses its grip on tomorrow. But just because tomorrow follows today does not necessarily mean that one thing always follows another. The bullet that is heading for your heart may never arrive. The plane floundering towards the earth may even pull up at the last minute, given the ambiguities and uncertainties of tomorrow. None of tomorrow's verbs can ever finish what they're doing. Trees stand for anything, stars too stand for anything. The whole galaxy screams something that is soon forgotten. So you can forget about the Bosnian bells with their human tongues and the war. The business of tomorrow is pulling up the roots of sadness so that the 3 children blown up in the speed factory in San Diego, what am I saying? We want to live as if our own bodies were nests. But possibility opens like the palm of a waving dictator. You can scale the ruins of heaven in search of love and never find it. But if you find Richard Jackson tomorrow, or even the day after, approach with caution. His words are snares. The horrible thing about tomorrow is that today is already history. We don't even exist the way we exist. Truth becomes a fixture. Love wakes in the keyholes. I don't know what other clues to give you. All the good souls have fallen from their nests. By tomorrow, the scene of the crime will be forgotten. But the heart's fingerprints are everywhere. I wasn't originally going to read this, but Jeff mentioned it earlier in the day, and so I thought I would. This is absolutely autobiographical. It's called Heartless Poem. It is true that my heart does not exist. It is absolutely true that the birds are not mine, the river will not stop for me, the leaves will not stop aiming for the very ground where I stand, that I cannot hold the smallest amount of air in my hands. The closed fist of the moon punches its way through the lake. Someone else might talk about the moon as a heart, but that's all I'm going to say about it. On this night, when the stars begin their lies about the light beyond them, when the young men from Tuzla are hanging from lampposts instead of lights, I'm here to tell you my heart has never existed. The only things I have ever heard of take to the highway with the carts and trucks of the other refugees. Why do you think you need to join them? If it were a violin, my heart would not rest between anyone's chin and shoulder. It would sit in a pawn shop window for someone's supper. On this night when my heart does not exist, I eat out of the hands of yesterday. If it did exist, the fist of my heart would grab the hanged man by the collar of his soul and turn him away from his own death. Who can say anything about the soul? The soul, too, is just another migrant. I've heard that the soul and the heart are the 2 best scavengers of whatever past you have discarded by the side of the road. You can find them sneaking around in some orchard behind the smoke a farmer uses against the frost, or plucking the hangman's weight like a pear. See, it's not so hard to say something about nothing. The stars are already leaking their light into the dawn, but I can tell you that my own heart has never existed, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Okay, I'm going to end with kind of like the companion piece to that. It's a poem I wrote a while back, and I read it to some friends in New York who were visiting from Europe, from Yugoslavia, from Slovenia. And I read it, it's just kind of a love poem. And when I read it, the man's wife turned to him and said, "Tomas, you gotta write me one of those." He was pretty ticked off at me after that. So it started off in the form of a sonata. I often use music as a way to kind of structure things. And it's a poem that's I've done several times, which is all one sentence. The idea, I guess, is that any moment, any time we have is made up of all kinds of moments and times that have come before and might come in the future too. Before I could arrive at this moment when the earth wakes inside you, when the night is still tangled in your hair, before I could see how the moonlight melts on your breast as you lay beside me, before you opened the hands of your soul at this moment that is so sudden, so unexpected, I can only imagine how the softness of your voice must be enough to stop the insects for miles. And I begin to understand how the way you open your eyes to the morning must be enough to change the orbits of planets. So it must have been necessary for me, if I've really arrived at this moment alive, to have lived a life where only my shadow planted the garden, only my shadow walked through the market, fingered the keys nervously, drove the car too fast, and it must be the same shadow that curls up in the corner of the room or is hung in the closet collecting moss. And it must have taken centuries of bones turning to light, of rivers changing course, of battles won or lost, of a farmer planting one crop or another that failed or not, one atom hitting another atom by chance, and through all this, a single string of time survived volcanoes, lightning strikes, car wrecks, floods, invasions, to lead to this moment, abandoned randomly to us. This singular moment that is part of time's litter, or maybe its architecture. Because now at this moment, which is so wondrous the way it lies beside you, I either do not exist or the past has never existed. Either my breath is the breath of stars, or I do not breathe as I turn to you. As you breathe my name, my heart, as the net of stars dissolves above us, as you wrap yourself around me like honeysuckle, the moon turning pale because it is so drained by our love. So that before this moment, before you lay beneath me, you must have disguised yourself the way the killdeer you pointed out diverts intruders to save what it loves, pretending a broken wing, giving itself over finally to whatever forces, whatever love, whatever touch, whatever suffering it needs to say, I am here, I am always here, stroking the wings of your soul. Thank you.